Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Harold Wilensky, who is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of California at Berkeley. He is a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the author or co-author of 13 books. Just published by the University of California Press is Rich Democracies, Political Economy, Public Policy, and Performance. In this landmark work, the culmination of 30 years of systematic, comprehensive comparison of 19 rich democracies, Wilensky answers two basic questions. What is distinctly modern about modern societies? In what ways are they becoming alike? And how do variations and types of political economy shape system performance? The book is being hailed as a monumental work, an instant classic, a truly amazing accomplishment. Hal, welcome to Berkeley.
Thank you.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born in New Rochelle, New York, and raised in that place for about 11 years. And we moved, when I was about 12, we moved to Norwalk, Connecticut, where my family remained. My brother was mayor of Stamford, Connecticut, and my mother stayed there until she was 93 and died. And so that was our home, really, Connecticut.
And looking back, how do you think your parents shaped your thinking about the world?
Well, they shaped it in a great many ways. They had a mom and pop store. It was a grocery store in New Rochelle, and during the Great Depression it went bankrupt. So we were down and out as far as income went. In the 30s, when I was growing up as, I don't know, what was that, 8 years to something like 11, 12, and on. And we had to move to Norwalk because it was cheaper rent. And a cheaper place. So that was the first thing. Now, what does a mom and pop store with a fiercely independent entrepreneurial family do for you? It makes you fiercely independent. So that's what I think is one fact of life here. The other was that they were political in the sense that they talked a lot at the dinner table. Remember, these were immigrants. So when they came over, they were 8 and 12, so they didn't know anything. But they learned it pretty damn fast, for which I give them great credit. Also, there's one other thing. They were, this was a Jewish family of immigrants who were from the border of Russia and Poland, but Russia, and they were, like all the Jews that I knew at that time, committed to education. Even in the middle of the Depression, they were seeing that their kids got something by borrowing, stealing, any way you could get the kids into college, they did. The kids didn't always respond. My two brothers, one of them didn't, and the other did, and I did. So the valuing of education and the value also of doing something with the natural-born talents you have. That was a strong idea. They didn't care what I became, so long as I used my talents.
So in addition to the Depression, which you've just described, World War II must have been a formative experience in your life.
You bet. Look, the Depression and World War II, if you came of age at that time, shook you up. And it accounts, I think, for my interest in the social sciences and society and politics because of the extraordinary disruption in your life that this imposes. So obviously you'd start thinking about larger things than, say, your little cocoon at home, and which I did. And indeed, I became a B-17 pilot, and while I was, I joined in 42, and I even read a book called Behemoth by Neumann about the Nazis, which was the first really solid social science treatment of totalitarianism that I had encountered, and I became very interested in all of this.
And so where did you do your undergraduate work?
I did it first at Goddard College in Vermont, a progressive college, and then I transferred to Antioch in '42. Antioch College in Ohio, and Antioch was in the middle of the war, and I spent only a quarter there, and then I went to, while I was waiting, I joined the Aviation Cadets, and while I was waiting to be called, they were hoarding manpower. The Air Corps, victory through air power. And I was part of the horde, and therefore they didn't call me up for months. And I had a job in the labor movement at that time.
Right.
I'd already had some jobs.
And Antioch is known for kind of work experience while you're...
And this was one of those co-op jobs, so-called, yes. And so did Goddard have that.
Yeah. So you, and what's interesting about your career, which we should touch on, is before going to graduate school, you had actually had a lot of experience both in the political realm and working for labor unions. Tell us a little about that experience briefly, and then how it shaped your later academic work.
Sure. I had a number of jobs in or around the labor movement that did shape my interest in comparative politics, comparative labor movements, in how the world works and how the lower half can maybe have some say in the democracies that we have. And all of this turned me on to social change and social reform and the kinds of things that the New Deal represented to my parents, the labor movement represented to me. And I worked for the NMU in New York.
And that's the NMU?
National Maritime Union, in awe of how they had cleaned up the waterfront. You may have seen the waterfront.
Yes, on the waterfront. Right.
Who was in that? I've forgotten.
Marlon Brando.
Yeah, Marlon Brando's waterfront. They cleaned that up, the NMU. It was a communist-dominated union, but that's one reason it cleaned it up. That is, left unions tend not to be corrupt. And the longshoremen and the East Coasters, corrupt. So what we had was a clean union that was cleaned up the shape-up system. It eliminated it and had a very orderly way of allocating. I was doing a background memo of 100 pages on the role of the merchant seaman in all the wars from colonial to World War I. And the New York Public Library is where I did it. And boy, was that some maritime collection. That was the first time when I must have been 19 or 18. When I did that.
So these jobs, and there were various of them, you really encountered the real life experience, both of politics and the laboring man and labor unions, and that really came to inform your later research.
It certainly did. In UAW, for example, I was there while I was waiting to be called up to fly. I was in the headquarters of the UAW, where Walter Reuther was fighting the communists for control of that union. At the very top level. I was down the hall. I mean, what can you ask for? That was an education in left politics and union politics and everything. It was a real, and the cauldron of Detroit at the time, there were race riots where blacks were really going after whites. This was a real race riot, and I was there at that time. So, I learned a lot in those few months. I also learned what sectarian politics were. I'd already gotten an inoculation from my parents about this, but man, when the Communist Party tried to recruit me in such a clumsy way and such they were contemptible in the switches back and forth in their policies on race, on labor union issues, on everything. And so that inoculated me permanently against sectarian politics or sectarian ideologies, which you'll find in my book. So, yes, that was very important. And I later had a job which was directly political, and I learned something about quantitative and qualitative research, and a job where I was interviewing politicians in Ohio and Indiana and in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania in 12 congressional districts who were marginal. It was a group that was a front for the Democratic Party and labor unions. And what it did was to study precinct election statistics, which I gathered, and I had to interview county chairman, Republican, some of them, and mostly county chairman Democratic, and newspaper editors and labor people, negotiators, leaders of labor, and make an estimate of where the Democratic Party should put its money in the 1946 election, which was, marginal districts. If that doesn't teach you something about politics, I don't know what would. And so there it is.
So when you went to the University of Chicago and entered graduate school, you thought you wanted to be initially an economist, but you found out that that wasn't what you wanted. Tell us that story. That's a funny story.
Oh, yeah, I think it's very funny. It's an illustration of the accidental in career development. I went to Chicago not for a degree. I went there for a union leadership training project, which was funded by Carnegie, and it was preparing teaching materials and then going on the road with 20 different unions. And I did that. And I prepared the materials, and then I went on the road and have institutes for a week long in each of the 20. That's another case where I stopped talking about the labor movement because there were so many different unions. My God, did I encounter the variety of union organization, ideology, everything. And that was instructive, to say the least. And the fellow who preceded me in this job, I went there for a full-time job, said to me, Hal, you are majoring in economics and political science at Antioch. Why don't you go on over to the econ department here and get a degree in your spare time? And I said, I'm not interested in degrees. I like ideas and all that, but degrees don't appeal to me. He said, you got to do that, Hal, because you never know. The labor movement may give out. Something may happen, so go. So I went over to the econ department in Chicago, and there were two young professors there, assistant, I assume, rank, one of whom was Milton Friedman. And he said, what have you been reading at Antioch in this economics and political science major? And I said, well, Karl Marx, Max Weber, Harold Wilensky, boy, that got him, and then Schumpeter and J.S. Mill. I threw in Adam Smith because I knew he'd like that. And in the end, he said, you're not an economist, you're a sociologist.
I see.
And you should go upstairs and see the sociologist.
And you did.
That's how I became a sociologist.
And he was right. Milton Friedman was right.
He was right in the sense that I gave the same list to these guys upstairs, and they greeted me with open arms.
That's great. That's great.
Anyway, that was accidental. And I ended up in sociology departments at Michigan and here, and then transferred to political science, where my interests really lie. Comparative political economy and comparative and political sociology are the...
But before we talk about your new work, briefly, I'd like to talk about what you see as the skills and temperament required to do social science.
Skills and temperament. A skill is, study in a good place like Chicago, or Berkeley, or Harvard, or somewhere. Try to get in a good place. You'll get plenty of skills that way. The education should be built on a liberal arts education where you really do read the classics, and you have to. I don't know that most liberal arts colleges still do this, but I felt that to know the history of social thought and of political thought was an essential feature of my life, and I recommend that for all undergraduates. And if you haven't done it by the time you've got to graduate school, you should do it. So that's so you won't breathlessly rediscover what has already been lodged in in the literature of 100 years ago.
What about temperament?
Better said 100 years ago.
What about temperament?
The temperament has to be one of scholarship. It means that, in social sciences particularly, but I think in other disciplines as well, that you're willing to so frame the propositions that interest you and that you're going to study in ways that they can be disconfirmed. So you disconfirm your own favorite notions. That is not natural. And so you're different from a journalist or a lawyer or any of these people who get a case made. And you'll find in my book a lot of consideration of alternative explanations that are popular and that are maybe accepted, and where I say something different, I have to take account of them. That's something that doesn't come easily to almost anybody. So I think the temperament is one of scholarly detachment, enough so you don't let your prejudices and your ideology infect too much of your work. There's some ideology in all social science in the choice of problems. Like, I'm interested in equality, so you'll find treatments of equality all over my books, and I'm interested in freedom and democracy, and you'll find that all over the place. But when I come down to studying things, it's systematic in the sense that I can disconfirm my favorite notions. That is not natural, so it takes a temperament of a scholar.
One of the notions about doing research that appears again in your work is the importance of doing interdisciplinary work, of not being trapped by your own discipline if the requirement of the problem requires more. Talk a little about that.
If you take Chicago as the model of a university that is interdisciplinary, the social science division there did not make a lot of the disciplinary boundaries. So I was hanging out with labor economists there. I had something of a contempt for economics by the time I got into my sociology degree, but I was hanging out with the people in industrial relations who were economists, and they ran a kind of seminar for me. So I learned some economics and got serious about reading it. So I would say Chicago encouraged this kind of thing. They made sociologists take anthropology, for example. They made us, I was taking interdisciplinary courses in a lot of them, and I moved from discipline to discipline. The basic idea is don't let these damn subfields put you in prison intellectually. And when I say subfields, there's so much balkanization of the social sciences now that I feel these graduate students ought to break out of this and let their intellectual curiosity roam and follow the problem. Don't follow the disciplinary boundaries. You'll always end up in fact, some of the best social science in the last 200 years has been in the interstices of the disciplines, like political economy, markets and politics, or political sociology, the social basis of politics. These are interdisciplinary right off.
Another characteristic feature of your work is the importance of doing comparative research. And you wrote somewhere in an essay about your own work, you say, when I hear about the internal strains within particular countries, I ask system strain, erosion, collapse of what, compared to what, in what specific policy area. Explain that to us.
Well, it's just another way of saying, let's say you're a student of American life, and you think that we're exceptional. American exceptionalism is a theory in political science and other disciplines as well, and from philosophy. And how can you know what's exceptional about the United States unless you compare it with other countries? Either poorer countries or all the rich democracies, which I do. And you'll find quickly that there isn't a lot that's exceptional about the United States. There are a few things that are very marked.
And so then in a way that helps you in this effort to frame your proposition so you can disconfirm them.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Let's say you believe the welfare state is a drag on the economy. You know, pensions, health insurance, family policies, all those things. Miscellaneous aid to the poor, the handicapped. All right, so you've got the welfare state. It's a drag on the economy. Well, you could find that's true if you compared Switzerland and Japan to Denmark and Italy. Because in the post-war period, Italy, and Denmark were big spenders with lousy economic performance, whereas Japan and Switzerland were lean spenders. They were great performers for 40 years. Yeah. So what we're talking about here is the 4 exceptional cases, because when you look at bring the whole 19 universe of rich democracies to view, you find that there is a positive correlation between social spending and economic performance until 1974, or even a little later. And then there is no relation after that. None. So it's just a mistake. If you don't do your comparative job, you will never know whether you're dealing with an exceptional case, the deviant case, or not.
Now, the one last point I want to make about the way you do research before we move into your book is it's very clear in this massive tome, which I kiddingly said to you that we could refer to it as the Bible, because it is such an extraordinary, comprehensive look at the set of problems. But you there's a note here where you say, well, look, this is not just quantitative research, that you are concerned about doing, I think you did 300 interviews, 400 interviews, excuse me,
more than that,
with leading policy figures and analysts and others.
Yeah, politicians, health and welfare officials, budget officers, union and management negotiators, all those people running these places.
But that play between those two ways of doing research is very important in your work.
Oh, yes. I mean, I tell students, I have told them for 40 years, that don't get caught up in these methodological ideologies, the false dichotomy between qualitative and quantitative, positivist and humanist, and all of those things are misleading. Not only that, they stop you from doing good work. So there are excuses. Using methodological ideologies are excuses for not learning something about the work of others who don't use your style of research. And to me, that's copping out. So, I read people I disagree with a lot, and people who have very different perspectives than my own. So that's the first lesson of work. First, but follow the problem, don't follow the disciplinary boundaries. Second, don't get caught up in methodological ideologies. I'd like to hear the definition of quantitative versus qualitative. It's not very clear. And not only that, you have to, if you're going to do quantitative work, that is relevant. And it's relevant when you're doing taxing and spending, and over time, 50 years, you've got to do quantitative work. You've got to measure the taxing and the spending. But you can't make any sense out of the numbers unless you do some case studies and intensive work of some kind. You can't make any sense out of it if you don't put it in historical and political context over time also. Now, that's a big demand on a student, and if you're doing a PhD dissertation, you're not going to do all of the above. But in the course of a career, you can do it, and in the course of 30 years of research like this project, I could do it all and put it in one place.
So let's talk about this 30-year gestation and its result in this work. Why the focus on rich democracies, and what is the set that you chose to study and work on?
Well, I've been interested in advanced industrial societies all my career. And I knew that I couldn't really learn about the whole world, although people do write about the whole world. I think it's pretty superficial. And if I could just find out something about the countries that are like the one I live in, I would be very happy. And to overcome my American parochialism, I started this, continued to overcome my American parochialism. I launched this project on originally the politics of taxing and spending, the welfare state, and a variety of other things. And those were books we produced. The students produced books, I produced books, and articles and all of that. But over that 30-year period, it was a project. NSF helped the National Science Foundation and the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller, lots of funding. You need a lot of money, you need a lot of time to do this. Berkeley was very helpful in giving me the time, and they were very helpful in giving me the money. Now, this is necessary if you are to understand modern life. And I've been teasing out that question of what's distinctly modern about modern life in courses that I've been teaching in my research, like Modern Society was one in the sociology department, and in political science I've been teaching comparative political economy, comparative public policy, labor, professions, and bureaucracy done comparatively. So I've been into that business for a very long time.
And you say in your introduction, a good theory of social change should address 5 questions. What is changing, how much, how fast, in what direction, what are the engines driving change? Now you tell us a little about the profile of the countries you selected. There were 19 of them.
Oh, there are 19. It's a universe of 19 rich democracies with 3 million population or more. New Zealand has 3.5 million, so you get an idea of the size. And the rest have more.
Now, I won't question you and ask you to name all 19, but just name a few of them.
Upper sixth of the world's distribution of wealth. I mean, of income per capita. That's the measure, and they're light years different from others. The rich have more money than the poor, and I mean a lot more.
They're
like
different.
30 times the poorer countries, 30 times the amount of money per capita. And we're talking about big differences here, and they are differences that make a difference in the social structure, the culture, and the politics of these countries.
Okay. Now let's try to walk you through point by point what you then set about doing, and you point out somewhere that what you were trying to do is play convergence theory against mass society theory and theories of corporatism in an effort to explain similarities and differences among rich countries as they become richer. Now, what I want to do is I want to unbundle that sentence. And so first I'm going to ask you to tell us briefly what convergence theory is and what it leads you to look at.
Okay. That's a long part of this book. The 3 theories you mentioned, and then I apply them in the rest of the book. So just briefly, convergence theory or modernization theory are theories of advanced industrial societies. The phrase is used, ask this question and make this statement. As rich countries got richer, and are they becoming richer still, do they become more alike in social structure, culture, and politics? If so, what exactly are these convergent characteristics? Thus, you will find a number of them. I don't have to go into this now, but the welfare state exists with 7 or 8 programs that are universal among these 19 countries. The richer you get, the more you're going to fund them and tax people for them, pensions, health insurance, all of it. That's just a start. Excuse me, when you look at there are differences, of course. The welfare state spending does vary, and you can talk about the efficiency and the generosity and all of those things, and you've got differences. But to begin with, you've got the 7 or 8 programs. The rise of higher education, mass higher education, is a characteristic of all of them. We are in the lead in that, the United States, in the excellence, the diversity, and the enrollment ratios. We are in advance, but everybody else is following. So that's a characteristic of modern society. That will produce a bunch of experts and political and intellectuals, some of them, and that's another characteristic. A third characteristic is the media of mass communication and entertainment will rise in power and dominate the culture and politics eventually, as it is doing in the United States today. Though here again you find differences. For example, the broadcast media are more dominant in the United States. It's one of the distinctive features of it, than they are in our sister democracies, for the reason that we allow the most deregulated broadcast industry on earth. The second thing is that we allow the broadcast media to act as gatekeepers for political communication. Our politicians are elected, for God's sakes. Who elected the broadcast media managers? Our politicians have to communicate with constituents. How can they do it in a country so complex and big as this without media access? Well, other democracies give them media access, free time. Every time in Congress you get free time on a bill to reform campaigns, it gets bounced out quickly. And we have had a lot of people trying that because they know the core of the problem here is access to the media. Politicians.
And you point out here that
that's
another,
distinct.
Yeah, that where these the media differs here is also in the lack of competition from public sector outlets, public broadcasting.
Oh yes, no, you can buy, if in other countries, BBC, for example, in Britain, and the Japanese equivalent, have 40% of the audience, and the reason for this is very simple. They're well funded. There's a license on TV sets. That money goes to fund public television. You buy a public interest on the television content if you do that. And we don't do any of it. We don't finance the PBS or any of these worth much. I mean, it's just they mostly get it from a continual fundraising operation with the viewers, and they don't produce in the level that they could produce if you gave them some money.
Now, you have a list here, which I'm going to quote you of all, because I want to wrap up this brief discussion of convergence theory, but in all of these countries you're looking at, we're seeing things like the increased breakup of the family, and gender equality is one of the lists I found in your work. The push for equality among minority groups, the rise of mass education, the increasing dominance of the media and mass communication, which we just talked about, the increasing number of intellectuals and experts, changes in social stratification and the organization of work, and rising social expenditures. So all of these societies are dealing with these problems.
And they all do those things.
Yeah.
And they're similar.
Right.
In the outcomes, the upper middle class is about a fifth of the labor force now in the United States. Others are moving in this direction. The richer you get, the more you're going to have, that upper middle class being very big. You will also have a middle mass, which I've called it, which is in the United States, lower middle and upper working class, which are becoming more and more alike in lifestyle, behavior, political outlook, and everything else, such that they really form a mass of people who behave similarly. And they're about 59% of the presidential vote. When Nixon went after the middle majority, when Wallace went after his litany of occupations, when the Texan, oh God, his name just slipped me.
Lyndon Johnson?
No, the third-party guy who ran.
Oh, Perot.
When Perot, how could I forget Perot?
Yeah.
Perot ran, he had that base. And abroad, you find the same thing. These protest candidates who work those themes of anti-taxing, anti-social spending, anti-bureaucratic, are the base tends to be the middle mass, which is more volatile. You find the Reagan Democrats there. You find the Perot voters there. You find the David Duke voters there. You find the Wallace voters there. In other words, high school graduates and part college people, the best measure of all of this, grows as a category. They become strategic in politics. Okay, and then you have the lower class or a variety of kinds of poverty.
Yeah. Now, You spoke in the sentence that I read you of playing convergence theory off of mass society theory. Now that's a body of theory. Tell us briefly about that and why that becomes part of the way you look at these democracies. What does mass society theory tell us about what's happening to societies in general?
Yes, it's a theory that is old and was formulated by everybody from Tocqueville, who did his American scene using theories like that and describing it that way. And he talked about well, let's not go into that, but on through a series of people who were refugees from the Nazis, who were intellectuals like Hannah Arendt and others who Karl Mannheim, a German, who were accenting the following. They said, the modern society is vulnerable to totalitarian movements like Hitler because of the decline or erosion of mediating associations that lie between the individual and the distant agencies of the state and of mass communication. They are, my voice is going, they are the churches, churches, unions, voluntary associations, and professions and farmers and all of those organizations. And they mediate. They prevent the state from intruding too much on your life. They are buffers against totalitarian states. And they are participatory possibilities for the population. So they're very important. Some of these theorists emphasize the breakdown of family neighborhood and the primary groups that also. But I show in my book that mass society theory is not a general theory of modern society. It applies to the least corporatist countries or the most fragmented and decentralized political economies. They're most vulnerable to these mass society tendencies, which are leaving a vacuum of the decline of the churches, unions, voluntary associations. There's a vacuum left once they decline. Political parties are, of course, extremely important as integrators, and they decline. So what do you got left? You got a vacuum of power. Who fills it? The mass media of communication and entertainment fill it. Lawyers and judges fill it. If you have no conflict resolution mechanism worth a damn, lawyers and judges will take over because you'll constantly refer them to the courts, your problems, because you can't solve them. And then the other force that will fill them is single issue groups that, like the American Rifle Association or Naders Raiders, they tend to be focused on one or two things, and they are not broadly based. They're not even organizations. I mean, they're movements of a computer and a membership list with solicitation. That is not a political party. That is not a union. That is not a church. It is not a voluntary association that has organization. It is a movement without members. Mass society is full of movements without members. And that is a threat to democracy because the media love them, and they will ignore the parties or anything that's left to articulate these. Now, I'm exaggerating only a little. But this is a characteristic of Britain and Britain abroad. It's Britain, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Switzerland belongs there only a little. It has a life of its own. It's really exceptional. But I think that those are the countries where they're most vulnerable to mass society. Demagogues can easily manipulate the population in such a situation.
So as we're trying to understand your research, what I hear you saying, and I'm going to simplify, and I apologize, but to move this along, that what you're saying is that all of these countries, in a way, are converging Hence, we want to look at how they're moving in one direction at different speeds, at different rates, and so on. That in the course of this, there are certain phenomena in the broad society that further the disintegrative elements within the societies you're looking at. But finally, there's another set of things you want to look at,
right.
And I apologize for that gross simplification.
No,
but
that's perfectly okay.
And that is what you call the structure of the political economy. Now, help us understand what. And you actually just were talking a little about it, namely some subset of your rich countries are very decentralized. And that, tell us a little about them, but a little about the other forms of political structure that appear in the spectrum.
There are only 5 or 6 countries that fit the category fragmented and decentralized, of my 19. The others have a different set of characteristics. The characteristics of the United States and Britain, and we got it from Britain, and so did Canada, and so did Australia and New Zealand. And I've said that Switzerland sometimes belongs there and other times does not. But those countries have a structure of government that is fragmented and decentralized. I need not say more. I mean, everybody knows that we have a decentralized federalism, and so does the Swiss. That's what holds us together. And the British and the labor movement is fragmented and decentralized. The Germans, who are corporatist and bargaining types, these have only 16 unions, and the IG Metall, which is the metalworkers union, leads in coordinating the unions, and it's 3.5 million members. I mean, it's the biggest union in the world.
And Germany would be an example of what you call a corporatist.
Yes, it's not the best case of it. Sweden, Norway, Finland, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany. Italy would belong a little, and then you get France and Japan in a separate category of their own. And so and Switzerland sometimes like them. But without getting into the details of this, basically, the fragmented and decentralized political economies are more vulnerable to the mass society tendencies we talked about. Whereas the other category, which is corporatist democracy, let's call it. I hate the word, but I have to use it. It's embedded in the comparative politics. The other words would be consensual democracy. Other words would be negotiated political economies. All right, now you get the idea that there's something going on there that's different from
what we know here in the United States.
What we know. And it is centralized government interacting with more or less centralized. Sweden is moderately centralized. Netherlands is highly centralized. The mayors are appointed in The Hague. All right, so there are various measures of this. Then centralization. And the labor movement is also somewhat centralized, as is the employer federations. So labor federations and employer federations are in this picture of bargaining. That's tripartite bargaining. And you throw in the professions and farmers, we're always organized, and then talk about other voluntary associations, which are similarly large and inclusive. So what you have is a system of bargaining among many interest groups, the economic blocs being prominent. And they are able to do 2 things. One, there's a kind of blurring that goes on between private and public, and the scope of bargaining is very wide. For example, it's not just wages, hours, and working conditions, as it is in the United States and the least corporatist political economies. It includes everything, all the issues of modern political economy: inflation, the balance of payments, the economic growth, the productivity, capital investment. Anything can come to view, and they do. Social policy comes to view. The great advantage is the trade-offs that can occur in such a structure. The structure says, labor will say, we're interested in wages, hours, working conditions, and social policy. Costs money. Management will say, fine, we're interested in having our taxes cut. We're interested in productivity and profit. let's get together and make sure we get our share of this business. And the government, interested in taxes and collecting taxes, will say, okay, if we're going to cut your corporate taxes and we're going to cut capital gains, we have to raise money in another way, like we'll invent the value-added tax, or we'll go to the payroll tax. And labor says, okay, so long as you have a family policy that will help the people hurt by this. And so you get all kinds of trade-offs going on throughout the history of this post-war period where these things were put into place by 1950.
So in a way, what you get is organized voices that can sit down at a metaphorical table and negotiate.
Talk to one another, and negotiate about major problems of modern political economy, yes.
Okay.
And now, that's a better system for the purposes of solving these problems and conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Now, people would argue, well, there are many disadvantages of this, and I take care of all those arguments.
Yeah, right. And you do. And in addition to the word Bible, I think I would use encyclopedia here for our audience in terms of the way you...
It won't sell a copy if you call it an encyclopedia.
Well, but it's a readable encyclopedia. And, you know, there was a day when Compton's encyclopedia was something you can turn to, but obviously this is at a much more sophisticated level. But let's, in the time remaining, and we've covered a lot, and the audience has to go out and buy the book, but let's take two problems. Let's talk briefly about taxes and tax rebellion. Very briefly, tell me the differences in the way your corporate states have handled this versus the decentralized ones.
Corporatist democracies dampen tax welfare backlash. There are many reasons for this, but if you ask, where are these tax welfare backlash movements? Do they have anything to do with the level of spending and taxing? One of the odd findings, or the ones that would surprise most people, is that the level of taxing and spending in a democracy doesn't have anything at all to do with tax welfare backlash, the protest against them. Tax welfare backlash movements are movements that, and parties, that sound this theme: anti-tax, anti-social spend, anti-bureaucratic. Think of Reagan, Thatcher. Denmark had a guy named Glistrup who was articulating exactly the same things about the same time as Reagan. And in Switzerland you had similar fellows, and you still have. And those are four countries. Notice, Switzerland is a lean spender. The leanest. The United States is, pretty lean. Denmark is a big spender. The UK, with Thatcher and her predecessors, actually, and Major after her, is a medium spender. So why did you have successful tax welfare backlash movements that last? I mean, these are come to power and they last. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about them. And so these are very important.
Now, why?
Why are they important?
No, not why are they important. Why do they happen?
Oh, all right. The tax structure can count. It's not, in the old words of an old pop tune, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And that is, it doesn't matter how the level of taxing and spending doesn't matter, but the structure of taxing and spending does. And what these countries are characteristic of these countries is that they have a heavy reliance on property taxes on households. The British call them the rates. And they have it brought down, incidentally, a change in the property tax brought down Maggie Thatcher as a trigger event. And of course it helped Reagan greatly to sweep California property taxes, and income taxes on households. Those are the two taxes that are most unpopular.
They get people mad.
They get very mad indeed.
Yeah.
And they are visible. They're paid in one big lump, and you're totally aware of them.
Yeah.
Now take value-added taxes. That is consumption taxes. You pay every day in every way, a little at a time, and you don't much care because once it's put in, you get used to it. Payroll taxes, they're mildly visible, but people really don't think that they're just putting it into they think it's a slot machine. You put it in, and you're going to get it out. It's a sin to try to tell them that they're not going to get it out, because they will. And there's no way you can take that away.
Yeah. Let's take another problem, very briefly. A problem like violence in these societies. You even develop a Mayhem index to get a hold of this problem, to figure out, well, how do we measure levels of violence? And then you go on to analyze the way these different rich democracies respond. In a nutshell, what is the difference between those societies that handle this problem in a way better than we do?
The consensual democracies, the ones that are corporatist bargaining arrangements that are more, peaceful, and they don't have a large number of strike rates and or the high strike rates that we do. These are the ones that dampen the natural tendency of an industrialized country to increase its mayhem. That is, if you take 1950 to the early 70s, murder rates went up like this in all these countries. And then it leveled in our country. It leveled off in the 80s, and it went down just very slightly in the 90s. So you're very high no matter what you do. Murder rates, we are light years ahead of everybody else. It's 3 times the next large murder rate, which is Finland, and the rest of, and we're 10 times what others have. So we are in a class of our own on murder rates. And when and if you take broader risks to view, I develop an index that says, okay, what can happen to the individual from the social and threats from the social and physical environment, and murder is one thing, and death by fire is another. Children die in fires lots, and unemployment is another, and these are things that happen to you that are unpredictable and that are often sudden and that are very momentous. You lose your life, you lose your family, you lose a lot. And then public policy could do something about them. Can't do anything about divorce rates, but it can do something about cushioning the shock of divorce and family breakup by a family policy.
Now, these corporatist states, in essence, do come up with a broad range of programs to deal with the social environment in which this is happening.
Yes, I mean, for example, family breakup. They deal with that by a family policy, and that is a heavy dampener. It's very simple. Corporatist bargaining arrangements produce a family policy. The reverse goes for means testing. And we need not get into that, but it makes the poor very visible and sets up a political process by which the poor are to be punished. And where demagogues can work the welfare backlash and say welfare mothers are riding around in Cadillacs, and Reagan did this, and they're on a lifetime vacation plan, as he said. It doesn't happen in these corporatist democracies because they have a family policy. They minimize means testing, and they they reduce poverty. That, in turn, a family policy, avoidance of means testing, and it will have some effect on equality and poverty, and that will dampen mayhem. So that's the scheme. However, I started by saying there will be mayhem in all these countries, and it will vary only if you have counter forces to the power of industrialization to make for mayhem. We're
about out of our time, and I think that we've left people with the notion that they do want to read this book.
I hope so.
and focus on the policies that are of interest to them, and we'll get a very comprehensive insight into the dynamics and how these societies compare. One final question. Looking back at your life, I'm curious what lessons you think an audience might draw from your life and your work. I have the sense that you came to the social sciences with a set of social values, concerns about social justice, equity, and so on. And that discipline has really given you the opportunity to pursue these problems in a very scientific and rigorous way. Is that a fair?
Oh, yeah, it's certainly given me that opportunity, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's a lesson for everybody. Not
Yeah.
everybody has to go in the social sciences.
No,
but I certainly think that the lesson is there is nothing like being a researcher, teacher at a major university. Mm-hmm. It is a wonderful life. I encourage all bright students in the undergraduate years to get on with their graduate work and become a student of social and physical and the universe. It is a wonderful life. There's nothing like it, and the fact that my parents were entrepreneurs, fiercely independent, is something you can do in a university. That is, you teach. Nobody tells you what to put in your courses, and obviously there's some constraints. You shouldn't shoot your mouth off just for propaganda purposes, which I'm afraid occasional professors do, but most of them are scholarly. They are committed to pursuit of the truth, and I think that it's a great life. It has variety, it has stimulation, you remain young forever, you're in touch with youthful folks all the time. Mm-hmm. I have found my students to be a great stimulus to me.
Mm-hmm. On that very positive note, I want to thank you very much, Hal, for taking the time. Well, thank you for producing this work, and thank you for taking the time to come here and talk with us about it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.